Can I say it's really great to be here. I've been going around the country, and what I've been finding is big meetings like this, because people know that their future, the future of their kids, their grandchildren, is all at stake. And you're right, it is at stake. The decisions that we take as a country over the next 6 months will determine our whole future. So it's important we get it right. Now, I'm learning, because I'm a former Transport Secretary, can I let you into a secret? Though I'm doing my best to stop Brexit, what I really want to get back to is running the national train service. my travel meticulously, I have a fantastic assistant, and he told me that it was going to be, because of this absurd Virgin pricing structure, which seems to segment the day into about 7 different categories, all of which are just the excuse to charge you more, that to get up to Macclesfield, to get in time for your meeting, was going to be 165 quid. Now, I could fly a turn from Spain for that. So I'm not paying 165 quid. Your job, I said, is to find me a cheaper route. After half an hour, he still hadn't found it, so I said he needed to go on the Split Ticket website. Now, the Split Ticket website, just so you know, to get from London to Macclesfield, leaving at 10 to 4, I did it for 28 quid, stopping at Stafford for 20 minutes. And there's a good Starbucks on Stafford Station, which is still open. So can I just give you a piece of free advice? If you're coming from London late afternoon, 28 quid via Stafford and London North Western, split the ticket, rather than 165 quid on Branson. And I've also gone off Branson as well, because he hasn't been nearly vigorous enough on this Europe business. I mean, where's he been over the last... indeed, where has the business community at large been? There's been a big problem in mobilising them, and so I'm certainly not giving him 160 quid. Though, last week, did you notice that when we had the reshuffles, it looked as though there might not be a government for 2 days? I did. Some of you may follow me on Twitter, and I'm always giving a running commentary because I've worked out how to do this Twitter thing. You need constantly to be feeding you information. I said the one thing Theresa May could have done last Thursday or Friday that will unite the nation would have been to have sacked Chris Grayling. Do you remember the famous 20 minutes when he was Secretary for exiting the European Union last year in a reshuffle, when it was decided, because of course we've now had the only thing that happens in this department for exiting the European Union is that the ministers exit. You know, we've had Radders exited, David Davis exited, we've got a new one there who I've never heard of before, who I'm sure will exit before this process is completed. Now, if we had Grayling in that, we would have finished off Brexit, so I was praying he would stay. But alas, it only lasted 20 minutes, so we didn't quite succeed there. But it's great to be here. I've been in the pub down the road. What's the name of the pub?
The Treacle Tap.
The Treacle Tap is great. While we were in the Treacle Tap, the guy next to us, we said, would he like to come? Because he was having a pint. And he said, no, but he was wildly anti-Brexit. Why? Because of his nieces, aged 10 and 7. He said he did not want them to be out of Europe. Now, do you know, I think that is the best possible reason for us staying in. And when I do meetings, as I do youth and student meetings up and down the country as well. And the best one was the guy who said to me in one of these meetings I was doing recently, Lord Adonis, I don't want Brexit to happen because I do not want to be shut up on a small island with Jacob Rees-Mogg, Nigel Farage and Boris Johnson. And do you know, I think that sums up why Brexit is such a bad idea. I wouldn't want to be shut up on an island with them too. Now, because we're all polite and we're British and we try to make things work, and let's be clear, we are a great democracy. The fact you're all here this evening and taking such an interest on a cold Wednesday evening just sums it up. We do take it very seriously. We don't do unrest. We do big debates. We also do votes, which is the reason why we need a people's vote, because the rising tide of public concern is such that what we now need to do is democracy now needs to swing into action. That's what needs to happen at the moment. But we do the banter as well, because I now spend longer in TV and radio studios with Jacob Rees-Mogg and Nigel Farage than with members of my own family. I do constant meetings and discussions with them where we debate Brexit. And so I've got a banter going, and I just want to give you some examples of the banter, how we do it, because what I try to do is we need to pretend, because Shakespeare, tragedy, comedy, the Hamlet, to be or not to be, also has the Gravediggers. Well, it's not particularly comic, but it's the best that he gets, and he finds a few skulls, but he knew how to combine the two. And so we try to do the same. Now, my banter with Jacob goes as follows. When President Macron, the President of France, he came to Britain, do you remember he came 3 months ago? He did a whole series of events, including a brilliant interview on the MAR programme, much more fluent than Theresa May has ever done on the MAR programme. But do you remember he has agreed to lend us, on behalf of the people of France, to buy a tapestry, which is a great, I'm not quite sure by the biotapestry. I can see it as a bit of a joke, I think, it is part in what it celebrates, but it hasn't left Normandy since the 11th century, and we're very grateful, and it's going to go on display in the British Museum, and it does tell the tale of a very important chapter of European history, actually, not just English history, and we need to go down there and take all our school parties down there and all that. But he asked for a return gift, and this is how the banter goes. Her Majesty the Queen, on behalf of the English people, has offered President Macron and the French people, as a return gift, Jacob Rees-Mogg. Because he symbolises everything that is best and worst about this country in the last 5 centuries. And he is going to go on display in the Louvre next year with the pinstripe double-breasted suit, the tie. He's very good at looking like a statue anyway, so he doesn't need to act that. He can just carry on doing it. And people will come and admire him. And he might 2 or 3 times a day pronounce on the Tory leadership, on how many letters he's got, or whatever else he wants to go. Jacob didn't quite like this joke, because I tried to encourage him to say what he would say in French to the people of France in the Louvre. But anyway, the latest iteration of this banter is that we've had a communication from the Élysée Palace to Buckingham Palace that with huge regret the President of France can't accept Jacob as the return gift. Because the biotapestry is considerably more recent. But underlying it, which is the reason I make these jokes, is a very, very serious point. What is the Jacob and this right wing of the Conservative Party, and there's a very sensible and moderate wing of the Conservative Party too, and there may be some of you here this evening who represent it, and I respect it greatly. But what does this right-wing bit of the Conservative Party do? What it basically wants to do is to turn the clock back. Let's be clear, it wants to turn the clock back 50 years, 100 years, 150 years, to some great glorious imperial past, where we ruled the waves, we told the rest of the world what to do. We didn't need to worry about these pesky things like trade deals and customs unions and single markets, because we could just dictate. The problem is, that's ended. Actually, it wasn't great when it lasted, when it was there, but it's ended. It is like the dead parrot in the Monty Python sketch. It is dead. It is not there any longer. The problem is that Jacob and people like that still think it's there. And you see it to devastating and I think very threatening effect when you ask them tough questions. So one of the toughest issues about Brexit is this issue about what's going to happen in Ireland. Do we have any Irish citizens here? Any other? This is a really, really tough issue. It's a really tough issue because one of the best things that's happened in our country in the last 25 years is the Good Friday Agreement and peace in Northern Ireland. You know, I grew up in London in the 70s and 80s when we were still having terrorism and bombs going off in London. Now, I was in Regent's Park on the day when the bomb went off on the bandstand that killed 9 Royal Green Jackets and maimed 30 others. And I couldn't understand then, because I'm a Londoner, and actually I'm a Cypriot in London, I'm some European. The reason I have this name, which is apparently, as people, my critics on Twitter like to point out, is the greatest defence against the Trade Descriptions Act ever. I strongly refute this notion, because I think this train called the Trans-Pennine Express is much worse. That takes an hour just to go 40 miles between Leeds and Manchester, so I think that's much worse. But I grew up in London, I didn't know much about North. I couldn't understand why these bombs were going off, and of course I now, because I've now spent a lot of time in Ireland, and I understand much better. But one of the best things that's happened in Ireland is the Good Friday Agreement. And one of the reasons why the Good Friday Agreement works is because there is no hard border between the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland. Indeed, because I go there the whole time now because of this terrible Brexit business. When you go on the A1, which is the motorway between Dublin and Belfast, you don't even know you've gone across the border. It is the most unmarked border in the world. It's much less marked than crossing between the county, between county boundaries in England. Deliberately so. It's part of the Good Friday Agreement. So the different communities in the Republic of Ireland and in Northern Ireland don't feel alienated and separated. It's very important. Now, to give Theresa May her due, because I think we should always be honest and frank, part of the reason why she's got this 570-page deal, which she signed last week, about 150 pages of it, as I've read it, are to do with this thing called the Irish backstop, and very, very detailed arrangements in respect of Ireland. And the reason she's done it is because she doesn't want to have a hard border in Ireland. I paid due credit to her. I have an answer to this, which is far better than her 170 pages, is, guess what? Stay in the European Union. Then you don't have to go down this route. To give her due, she's not going down the route of the far right, who say, don't worry about Ireland. She isn't doing that. She's trying to find some way of leaving the European Union, but not leaving it in respect of Northern Ireland. And the provision of what is called, this very complicated thing called the Irish backstop, effectively means that while Great Britain will leave the European Union, Northern Ireland won't. That's what it effectively means. It's a terribly unsatisfactory situation. It will probably break up the United Kingdom, which is part of the reason why this thing shouldn't go ahead. But nonetheless, that's the reason why it's doing. But so what I've started doing when I do these debates with the Brexiters is I say to them, what is your answer to the Irish problem? Because everyone accepts this. And do you know what Jacob says to me? Here's his answer. Ireland should leave the European Union too. Now, can you just think about that for a moment, what that means? There is a kind of weird logic to it, because if Ireland leaves the European Union and then unilaterally agrees to adopt our commercial policy, our trade policy, whatever else it is that Jacob and Boris Johnson, whoever's then Prime Minister, agree, then you don't need to have a border on Ireland. But just think what that means. What essentially it is neo-colonialism in Ireland. Yeah. Now, we did try that. We tried it for about 6 centuries. Can I let you into a secret? It did not work. It is part of the reason why, tragically, the Republic of Ireland is independent, rather than what Gladstone, and we've got some Liberal Democrats here this evening, my great hero is Gladstone. Let's be clear, on Ireland he was completely right. What he wanted was a united kingdom of the whole British Isles, where you had devolved parliaments, rather like we've now got in Scotland, in England, Ireland, Wales and Scotland, and that should have happened, and it was a tragedy that it didn't happen, and it didn't happen because of the equivalent of the Brexiters today in the 19th century. It's unfortunately why it didn't happen. As a result of it not happening, we had civil war in Ireland, the Republic of Ireland became independent, and Northern Ireland became a separate entity. It is a tragic and terrible story. The idea that the answer to our problems and to dealing with Brexit is to turn the clock back is, can I be frank with you, is entirely monstrous, and we've got to resist that. So, beneath the banter is a serious argument. Now, we then come to my equally good friend, Nigel Farage. Now,
Farage.
Well, he calls himself Farage, so I call him. I thought Farage is very old, because you've got to remember that Farage, the reason why it's Farage, spelled Farage rather than Farage, rhyming with garage, the reason why it's like pronounced that is because he's a French Huguenot. It's important to understand where the family comes from. Nigel is part of the Huguenot migration into this country after the revocation by Louis XIV of the Edict of Nantes in 1685, when the Protestants in France were essentially expelled. And we offered, because we're good at doing that in this country, it's part of the reason why England is such a great country, we offered safe haven. And the Farages came then. What Nigel, of course, wants to do now is to lift the drawbridge. I say to him, I think it was great we accepted the Huguenots. Why are you telling this generation that they can't come? But anyway, my banter with Nigel goes as follows. Nigel, I will exchange my seat in the House of Lords for your German passport. Now, the reason I thought he might have a German passport is he was spotted, and I have spies everywhere. Particularly, I have a whole network of spies in embassies and with European countries. He was spotted in the German embassy a year ago filling out the citizenship forms. Now, being German forms, they're very long forms, and it took him several hours to fill them out. And I knew I was onto something, because when I said it the first time, he didn't deny it. And then he didn't deny it the second time either. So I thought, I'm really onto the winner here. So when I started going for it, and I did his LBC show, because he has me on every night, he's got to show some sort of balance. Third time, he said, Andrew, I wish you'd stop going on about this German passport. He said, I have not got a German passport, he said. So I said, but Nigel, why were you in the German embassy? Because you come tonight, I'm told I have pictures, I can produce them. And he said, I was filling out the forms for my children. Now, I said, no, I don't, because I've got kids, and I don't bring them into politics, and I don't bring other people's kids into politics. But he had raised it himself, and I was on the rebound of this programme. So I said, okay, because he's got a German wife. So what's happening is he was applying for citizenship for his two kids in their 20s, because they're eligible for German citizenship. I said, Nigel, it's fantastic. I'm delighted that they're getting German citizenship. And it's very interesting that they want German citizenship now, not having had it before. And we all know why. It's because of all the benefits that will come from German citizenship that they're not going to get when we leave the European Union. However, I said, Nigel, can I ask you, I think by rough calculation of the population, because we're in a country of 63 million, there are about 10 million youngsters in their 20s in England. They'd all love to have German citizenship as well. Why can't they have it? You're about to take their European Union citizenship away from them with all the rights that it confers to be able to travel, live, settle, work, forge relationships across Europe. Why can't they have it too? He was slightly nonplussed about this, and at that stage, as always happens in my conversation with Nigel, how can I put it delicately, the conversation degenerated at that point. However, I have this wonderful organisation of young people called Our Future, Our Choice. They're students or in their 20s, they do fantastic work. They've taken time out of uni, or the youngsters who haven't got jobs yet, and they're busy mobilising young people up and down the country. Which is, by the way, how we will win the next referendum if we have it. The young will mobilise the young. They're not having their future stolen from them a second time after what happened 2 years ago. But they're also very, very good at stunts. So the guy who's their chief stunt maker, who's taken a year out from uni, he listened to this and he had a brilliant idea. The following morning at 8 o'clock, he was outside Nigel Farage's house with adoption papers. Can you see where this is going? Now the problem is that Farage is a very, very good politician. He was slightly nonplussed at the beginning. But what he did was to take this guy down to the pub. It was 9 o'clock in the morning, but the pubs in his area were open because they knew that Nigel might bring them custom. And after an hour and a half in the pub, unfortunately, he wowed him, and he left the adoption papers in the pub, which I told him was not rising to the level of events. But anyway, Nigel was slightly irked by this because he kept being greeted in events by youngsters with adoption papers wanting to be adopted by him. And so when I was next doing a thing with him, he was irritated at this and this option. He said, it's completely wrong. He said, I'm not proposing to pull up the drawbridge for the youngsters at all. By the way, that is happening. Did you see the Prime Minister's immigration policy that she announced 3 weeks ago? No one with incomes of under 30k is going to be allowed into the country. Now, the important point about this for all of your kids and grandchildren and any young people who are here is that I'm afraid, because we're not an imperial country that can tell everybody else what to do, if we say to the rest of the European Union, you cannot come here if you earn under 30k, they will say the same thing to our young people. And what does that mean? They will not be able to work on the continent. That is, let's be clear, there's a very serious thing behind this. But anyway, on this one, I always want to push these things on. So I said to Nigel, I'm sorry that you've been inconvenienced by people serving adoption papers on you. I said, but I've got a question to ask you, which I've been asked to pose to you. What is the maximum age at which you'll adopt people? Because I have a 93-year-old who wants to be adopted by you. Will you adopt them? Because they're very keen to go and live in Berlin. And they think they might not have the right to. At that point, the conversation degenerated. But anyway, I've got a new banter with Nigel now. But so you understand the important point behind that. He is proposing to take fundamental rights of citizenship away from 63 million people. Because let's be clear that is, because at the moment, because of the genius of the European Union, the way it's evolved over 45 years, we are both British citizens and European Union citizens. And that is not a notional thing. It's because we are also European Union citizens that means that we have a completely free right, not subject to any bureaucrat or anybody telling us that we can't do it, to be able to travel, to work, to live, to settle, to forge relationships and all of that across Europe. That is a valuable right of citizenship. I value it. I imagine many of you value it. 1.5 million Brits actually live on the continent, and all of their rights are at stake if this doesn't happen. And the whole of the next generation, they are desperate to retain these rights, and they're quite right that they should do so. And so we need to fight on their behalf. But the current banter I've got going with Nigel is on this issue of how much we're going to pay the European Union when we exit. Which is quite important because it's a kind of just a symbol of this big issue, which Nigel and Boris Johnson and Jacob keep going about, that we could just walk away. Because you've got to understand that the Brexit camp is now splintered into two. All revolutionary movements splinter, because what always happens is you get the realists and then you get the extremists, the French Revolution, the Girondins and the Jacobins. And the realists, which is Mrs May, have done the best they can to try and make a reality of Brexit. I think it's a terrible dog's breakfast, and having seen this 560 pages, I think we should reject it. But nonetheless, let's pay tribute to her. She has got an agreement with the European Union. It's a terrible agreement. The right thing to do is reject it, but it could be implemented. It is actually possible to implement it. It's been agreed by the European Union, all the 27 governments, it could be implemented. What the extremists, the Jacobins, are doing, which is Boris, Nigel Farage, Jacob Rees-Mogg, is they are saying, this is compromise, this is dangerous, this is a betrayal, this is stab in the back, this is all the rhetoric you always get in revolutions. They are selling out. They're selling out, and this 39 billion we're giving the European Union is a disgrace of money for old road. And if only we were in charge, there would be none of this 39 billion. There would be none of this appeasing of these Europeans. And we would have the land of milk and honey, where we pay nothing. We still have this Canada plus. We've been following all this and all that. We don't need to worry about the Irish backstop, because, of course, the Irish are, this is... But remember Boris, the Irish is the tail wagging the dog, so we could just ignore it. This is the... do you remember that Dominic Raab, who was the second of the three Brexit secretaries, remember he discovered Calais a month, 3 weeks ago. Before then he thought Calais didn't exist. He does now at least understand that most of our trade goes through Calais, so it's a good idea to have an agreement. But it doesn't seem to have lasted long, this discovery of Calais, because he said that you remember he resigned last week. He resigned having agreed the treaty. I mean, you couldn't make this up. As one of my Twitter followers said, it's like the guy who robs the bank, who then is apprehended on the way out and commits a citizen's arrest. I mean, that's roughly what he was doing last week. Anyway, he discovered Calais, and it was all a terrible thing. But they're not prepared to make any compromises. And what they say, because they never define their position, what they do, which is always what revolutionaries do in these circumstances when you want to create a division, is whatever the people who do the compromises do, you disown them. You say, we would do something better. You don't have to define it. We would do something better, which is roughly what the far right is doing at the moment. And one of the things they would do better is we would not pay the £39 billion. So whenever I'm in a studio with Nigel now, I keep asking him, well, Nigel, how much would you pay? The Prime Minister has said 39 billion. How much would you pay? 30 billion, 20 billion, 10 billion? What is the figure? And he keeps ducking it. He ducks it for a good reason. He knows if he actually had to specify a figure, he'd need to say what it was going to buy, what are the obligations that we're going to meet and not meet and all that. Anyway, after the last time I did it, we got very irritated because I keep going at him. I've got a style of doing it because because I may be more, as the critics say, more Andrew than Adonis. But one of my skills is I'm a bit relentless. I'm a bit of a terror, and I go for it. And so he lost his rag, and he said, Andrew, I wish you'd stop going on about all this money, he said, as if it was a kind of a sordid thing. It is quite a large amount of money. It's important. He said, the amount I would give the European Union when we leave them is round. He said, it is nothing. And there was the moment when clearly there was a kind of ice in the atmosphere. I said, Nigel, that is great. At long last, you've defined your position. What you would give them is no money at all. I said, thank you for saying that. I said, the problem is it's impossible to give them nothing. So we can't give them nothing. I said, because we've got this big issue of your pension. Remember, he's been a member of the European Parliament for 20 years. He is entitled to a £73,000 a year pension. I said, Nigel, you may not want to give anybody else a pension who's worked in the European Union. You may not want to pay for all the infrastructure projects which are going on, including many near here, which are being paid for by the EU. You may not want to give all the farmers all their backdated payments that they're entitled to. You may want to be in all the international courts because we're in breach of our international treaties, because we're not settling our debts, but we've at least got to pay your pension. Because one thing I cannot have done is we cannot have you being a burden on the state. And I said, and I feel this particularly strongly because I now know that your kids are going to be in Germany. So they're not even going to be coming over and looking after you. So I said, at the very least, Nigel, because I always try to, the thing to do about these things is just to relentlessly follow these things. So what we've got to do, Nigel, I said, is we need to make an estimate of how many years you intend to live beyond the age of 60, multiply that by £73,000 a year, and then we need to put a big administrative fee on, because I agree with you, this European Union is terribly bureaucratic, so can you imagine what the administrative costs are going to be paying our pension? And then we at least settle for that. At that point, the conversation degenerates. But you understand the point, don't you? The point is, we cannot leave without settling our debts. We're Brits, we don't do that, we'd be in breach of international law. These people are complete charlatans for saying that we can do it, and they need to be exposed. And we cannot agree to allow this to happen, which is the reason why we're all here this evening, because we know it's all barking mad. It will impoverish us, it will lead us to losing a lot of the benefits that we've got from membership of the European Union. But moving away from the banter, what is the right thing to do now? Because of the impossibility of Brexit, Brexit is, to continue the revolutionary analogy, Brexit is the revolution that devours its children. Because it is actually impossible to do in a way that makes sense, it is each person who attempts to do it is either forced to resign or exposed, or like, unfortunately, Theresa May, who I at a personal level, I've got some time for, but it's clearly not going to work out for her, and her reputation, unfortunately, is going to be amongst one of the very worst Prime Ministers of this country. Why? Because she engaged Brexit rather than telling the British people that having looked at it couldn't be done, which was the thing she should have done, which, by the way, is what leaders do. Leaders do not simply say, I am your leader, I'm going to follow you. That is not what Churchill did. Let's be clear. That is not what great leaders do. What great leaders do is they make a judgment as to what is in the interests of the country, and they seek to persuade people to follow them. And they obviously take full account of what the people want, but that doesn't mean to say that they just do it. Because remember, Churchill, who's one of my great heroes, and by the way, the founder of the European Union, essentially, it was the Zurich speech of 1946 which inspired the European Union, including that great phrase, in the wake of the Iron Curtain coming down and the potential of really serious conflict in Europe again. He said what we need in order to preserve democracy and security in Europe is a kind of United States of Europe. Those were Churchill's words. That, and then he became the first chairman of the Council of Europe, which itself became the body which led to the Treaty of Paris, which I'll have something to say about in a moment, and the beginning of the European Union. So that's where the whole thing came from. He was a phenomenal leader. But it's important to understand, because we've been we've been commemorating the terrible, terrible catastrophe of the First World War and the centenary of the end of it. Remember, in 1938, when Chamberlain comes back with his piece of paper from Munich, Churchill was one of the most unpopular people in the country, because people hoped to goodness that it was possible to preserve peace. Alas, it wasn't. What happened between 38 and 39 is roughly the process we're going through with Brexit at the moment. With the best of intentions, and I don't denigrate Theresa May's intentions, she is wanting to do the right thing for the country just as Chamberlain did, it did not work out. And what Churchill had to do in 39, and when he became Prime Minister in 1940, is to say to the British people, look, I'm very sorry, I know that this appeasement thing, it had massive support. If there had been a referendum on appeasement in 38, there would have been something like 90% support. But it didn't work out. And the job of a leader when things don't work out is to say, look, I'm sorry, the right thing is now, and it's going to be difficult and all of that, is to dispense with the illusions and to make the best we can of a very bad job, which is, and actually in this case, the very, very best of a very bad job is very simple. It is scrap Brexit. Let's be clear what it is. It's to scrap Brexit entirely, not different versions of Brexit. We've tested that idea to destruction over the last 2.5 years, haven't we? There's somehow good Brexit against a bad Brexit. The only good Brexit is no Brexit. That is the reality. And the job of a leader is to say that to the country. And the way of doing it is, because we're a democracy, to say, obviously this can only be done by democratic consent. And the way to do it by democratic consent is to give the advice to the British people that we should do it and to have a referendum. That's what should happen. It's very, very clear what should happen now. So that's the position we're in. In a month's time, there are the parliamentary votes on Theresa May's deal. It looks to me as if it's going to be rejected. You can never be certain what's going to happen in politics, but it doesn't look as if there's the votes in it. It looks as if there's going to be an alliance of the people who, like us, are strongly opposed to it because we think it's better to stay in, and also a lot of people like the Jacob Rees-Moggs, the Boris Johnsons and all that, who are against it from the other extreme because they think it's a betrayal. So I think it's going down. Now, if it goes down, there are only two other options which could be followed besides the people's vote. Option one is you could have a new negotiation. But let's be frank, we've had 2.5 years of negotiating. The idea in the 3 months remaining that we could do a substantively new negotiation is for the birds. What would we agree as the negotiating brief? I mean, because let's be clear, the coalition that would have defeated this deal will range from people like us through to Nigel Farage. Now, the idea of Nigel Farage and me being in a room and agreeing a negotiating brief, can you imagine? I mean, feathers will fly and all kinds of things happen, but what you will not get out of that room is a negotiating brief. And the Chancellor of Germany has said, and she's not saying it in a threatening way, she's just saying it as a matter of fact, as she said last week, that it's not going to be possible to have further negotiations, because you couldn't begin to have a substantively new negotiation over just 3 months now. So further negotiations are almost certainly for the birds. You could have a general election, but I don't think we're going to get a general election because that involves Conservative MPs being turkeys voting for Christmas. I don't think that's going to happen. And then the only thing that is left is a people's vote, and the right choice which the people should be given is Theresa May's deal, which at least is viable in the sense that it could be implemented, against the status quo. And do you remember the Sherlock Holmes book? I think it's The Hounds of the Baskervilles, where Sherlock opines that once all the impossible things have been eliminated, you're just left with the improbable. Well, the impossible things are being eliminated. The improbable thing is a second referendum, and that's where I think we're going to end up. So don't get comfortable and all that, because this is just the beginning of a whole process of massive campaigning that we're going to have to undergo in 6 months, over the next 6 months, for a second referendum. And the second referendum, by the way, can easily take place. When people say it can't be done, it's all the people who don't want it to be done say it can't be done. We would have to extend this thing called the Article 50 period, which expires at the end of next March. But the European Union would almost certainly agree to extend it for the purposes of holding a referendum, precisely because the European Union is a club of democracies. You wouldn't necessarily recognise it from 3 years, or actually 20 years, of the Daily Mail and the Sun. But the reason why the European Union is so successful is because it is a club of democracies. And one of its rules is that it always respects the democratic processes of member states when it comes to ratifying treaties, agreeing policies and all of that. And all the best advice we've got, including from the guy who negotiated Article 50 when it was made part of the European Union rules 20 years ago, is that if we ask for an extension of this Article 50 negotiating period for the purposes of holding a referendum, it will be agreed. So the most likely scenario, if Theresa May's treaty is voted down, is that there'll be a vote for a referendum. You have to pass the legislation for the referendum, you have to extend the Article 50 period, and then we have a referendum probably in next May or June. So there's a lot to do. Now, if we get that referendum, our argument should be very straightforward, to stay in. None of this stuff about better Brexits rather than worse Brexits. And there are 4 key arguments as to why we should stay in. The first is our jobs and our economy. And the facts here are very simple, and no one's been able to gainsay them. 45% of our trade goes to the 27 other member states of the European Union. Why? Because the first rule of trade economics is that trade halves as distance doubles. The reason why we have the customs union and the single market with our 27 nearest neighbours is because that is where most of our trade goes through. Ireland, we have more trade with than China. Not because Ireland is larger than China, but because it's closer, including a 250-mile land border with an island itself, whereas China, though Liam Fox took him a while to realise this, is some way away. and we've got to start getting this argument fact-based. You know, Liam, who has been accumulating more air miles in pursuit of less than anyone in the history of aviation, it's all very well for him to say he's going to have these easiest trade deals in history. And by the way, none of those are materialising at the moment, because these trade deals are very complicated. Each of these trade deals is hundreds of pages long. I mean, they're very complicated things. But the countries he wants to negotiate the trade deals with, you remember Australia, New Zealand, I think Antarctica's been on there too. These are all places a long way away with which we have very little trade at the moment, and we will not have much more because they are a long way away. Australia, 1.7% of our trade. Now, if we have a brilliant trade deal with it, maybe it goes to 2%. It is not going to go to 10%. New Zealand, 0.5% of our trade, partly because New Zealand is a very small country in terms of population. It's also on the exact opposite side of the world. So we need to get real about our trade. And it's not just the 45% of our trade that goes to the 27 other member states of the European Union. There's another 15% of our trade, which takes it to 60%, that goes to the 73 other countries with which the European Union has trade treaties at the moment. And to see that we're no worse off than we are at the moment, you have to replicate all of that just to get to first base. And at the moment, there's no sign of that happening at all. So, trade and jobs are the first reason. Reason 2, Ireland. Let's get rid of all this stuff about backstops and backstops to backstops and facilitated customs areas and all of that. If you do not want a hard border in between the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland, the only way of guaranteeing that is not to leave the European Union. Because as soon as you have different customs and trade and immigration statuses between different territories, it doesn't matter what you say, how warm the words are, about how much we love each other, it's all going to be fine. You have to have border infrastructure. And if you don't start by having border infrastructure, what you get is massive illegality And once you've got illegality, the police have to swing into action, you have to start having border staff, and you get massive tension. And you don't need to take my word for it. The person who's been saying this loud and clear is the Chief Constable of the Police Service of Northern Ireland, who only has one duty, which is to maintain the peace of Northern Ireland. And he has said that the single biggest threat facing Northern Ireland is Brexit. And the reason is because if you have different customs regimes across those two borders, even if you have your backstop, which means it's not as great as it might otherwise be, you will have massive smuggling. There's a huge tradition of smuggling across that border already in the past. The smuggling will be allied to the paramilitary groups because they're all the people who've run the smuggling in the past. And what will all that money go from when they start smuggling? Well, we all know where it goes to, paramilitary activity. So what he has said, and he said this in public because he's so concerned, is it's not good enough for the politicians to talk about this frictionless border where everything apparently is going to be done on the internet or in the cloud or something, and it's not going to happen. If you have different customs regimes and tariffs between these two borders, which will inevitably follow if we leave the European Union, you will have to have customs and regulatory checks, and as soon as you start doing that, that endangers the current very fragile, and it is very fragile because I've been there, and it's not the idea that everything is all hunky-dory in Northern Ireland is completely, you can only say that by not going there. At the moment it's very fragile. So if we want to maintain peace in Ireland, which we have a duty to do morally, because it's part of the United Kingdom, but also have a practical reason for doing it, because the last thing we want is a recurrence of the Troubles and all that's going to mean for us, then the right answer is no Brexit. Not different forms of Brexit, but no Brexit. Argument 3, young people. Surely what we should want for our young people is to have broad horizons, not narrow horizons. The idea we should be saying to the next generation that you are not going to be able to travel, work, live, forge relationships across Europe would be such a backward step that, and I can understand why the right wing like the idea, and let's be clear, they're not the ones who would suffer from this mostly, because they've already got their houses in France and their holidays in Tuscany and all that. But I just think it is fundamentally wrong. I think it's more than fundamentally wrong. I think it's actually immoral what's being proposed, because it's other people's kids and the next generation they can bear the cost of them posing as newfangled English nationalists. And the right thing to do is not one form of Brexit rather than another, because all forms of Brexit involve losing citizenship rights. The right thing to do is no Brexit. Fourth and final big argument why we shouldn't do Brexit at all and we should stay in the European Union is something we didn't talk about much 2 years ago, but I now feel very strongly about, and I think we need to talk about it a lot if we have a referendum next year. Peace.
Yeah.
Let's get real about this. This is a very dangerous continent. We have Putin there, who is a neo-fascist, who has already invaded 2 European countries, the Ukraine and Georgia, occupied both of them, and is threatening the Baltic states. Now, we have been here before in the 1930s, of countries threatening the peace of Europe. What's the answer to that? It's to remain close and engaged, and for the democracies of Europe to hold together very strongly. Anything that doesn't do that is going to weaken European security, not least because there are big threats to European democracy within Europe itself, which always happens when you have periods of austerity and populism as we're going through at the moment. The strong man in Italy at the moment is a guy called Salvini. Salvini has started tweeting out Mussolini slogans on his birthday, so you can see where that may be going if we get that wrong. We have Mr. Orban in Hungary, who has started abolishing independent universities run by Jews, dismissing judges, and nationalising all of the media. Now, it's not quite dispensed with democracy, and the reason why he hasn't completely dispensed with democracy is he knows that he'd be forced to leave the European Union if he did that. But the last election by common consent in Hungary, which was earlier this year, was free in the sense that there was a genuine election and people could cast ballots, but it certainly was not fair. And you've got something similar going on in Poland, and even in the 2 great stable democracies in Europe of the last 40 years, Germany and France, all is not well. The official opposition in Germany is this party called the AfD, the Alternative for Deutschland, which has got strong neo-fascist elements in it. The runner-up in the French election, which produced the great Macron 2 years ago, the runner-up was the National Front. The Swedish election 2 months ago, the far right won 18% of the vote. Now, starter for 10. Is this the moment for us to be leaving the European Union or to be staying in it? And when people say, but defence is all NATO and the EU is about trade, anyone with any sense of history or knowledge of how the world works, the idea you can separate clinically defence and security from trade is a total nonsense. And just remember what happened in the run-up to the First World War. What ended up as the biggest catastrophe in European civilization began as a big trade war between Britain and Germany. It was all those tariffs which Bismarck started erecting in the 1870s. Why? Because he wanted to steal a march on us economically. So all of this is not just a nonsense, it's extremely dangerous. And the point which I then want to come back to finish with is, of course, the reason why the European Union was set up was as one massive peace project. That's what it was. When you look back at the founding documents and charters of the European Union, including Churchill's speech in Zurich in 1946 and the work of the Council of Europe, it was all first and foremost about maintaining peace. Tragically, we didn't participate in the European Union and its the European Coal and Steel Community and the Treaty of Rome and all of that at the beginning, partly because we thought that they wouldn't work. We had this very pragmatic British attitude that we should do things pragmatically and not create institutions. But in fact, the institutions did work, and what we ended up doing, of course, was having to join them just 20 years late. But in the book, which I'm selling for a tenner afterwards, if you're really unlucky, you will get it signed. But all of the proceeds are going actually, what the proceeds are all going to, because I'm not making a penny out of it, all the proceeds are going for young Brits to be able to volunteer or study in Europe. Because part of my analysis of what's gone wrong in the last 20 years is not enough Brits go and study and work and volunteer on the continent. In particular, we are terrible at learning European languages. Our European colleagues, they all learn English, which is the reason why we have such massive numbers who come to our universities and study and work here. We don't have so many going the other way. We've got to put that right. There are a lot of lessons, things we've got to learn from in the last 30 years. But when I wrote the book, one of the things I did was to go and look back at the founding treaties and institutions of the EU. And the founding treaty of the EU is the Treaty of Paris of 1951, which founded an organisation called the European Coal and Steel Community, which had a commission, which then, through the Treaty of Rome, became the Common Market, which then became the European Economic Community, which is the thing we joined in the 1970s, which then, with the Single Market, which remember Margaret Thatcher set up, so it wasn't some sort of great socialist conspiracy, has the word marketed. My guy, Jeremy Corbyn, the reason he doesn't like it is because it has the word marketed. There's another story there. But it's all of that which then led to what's now the European Union. It all began with the Treaty of Paris and the setting up of the European Coal and Steel Community in 1951. And I quote the founding sections of the Treaty of Paris in my book. And the really striking thing about the Treaty of Paris, to my surprise, is it doesn't talk about widgets and coal and steel or any of that at all. What it talks about in the opening, what's called a preamble, because it's a treaty, but the opening section of the treaty is peace, war and civilization. Because remember, this is 6 years after the end of the Second World War, after Belsen, Auschwitz, the most appalling atrocities, which we still shudder to think about, and many of our grandparents were involved in all this. By the way, they were very keen on this European construction, and the last thing they wanted was this to happen again. But this is the opening section of the Treaty of Paris, and I just want to read it to you because it explains why this European Union was set up and why it's so important today. The President of the Federal Republic of Germany, the Prince Royal of Belgium, the President of the French Republic, the President of the Italian Republic, the Grand Duchess of Luxembourg, the Queen of the Netherlands. Considering that world peace can be safeguarded only by creative efforts commensurate with the dangers that threaten it. Convinced that the contribution which an organised and vital Europe can make to civilization is indispensable to the maintenance of peaceful relations. Resolved, and this bit is amazing for an international treaty, resolved to substitute for age-old rivalries the merging of their essential interests to create, by establishing an economic community, the basis for a broader and deeper community amongst peoples long divided by bloody conflicts, have decided to create a European coal and steel community. That's the reason why what's now the European Union was founded 70 years ago. It's the reason why it is utterly relevant to us in Britain in 2018. It's the reason why we should have a people's vote, and it's the reason why we should campaign until that last vote is cast, so that we stay in the European Union and we don't put our peace and prosperity in serious jeopardy, which is what we may be about to do. Thanks very much.